Hey everyone, my name is Mallika Iyer. I am with Pivotal with the Global Ecosystem Engineering team. I'm a principal software engineer on the team. You can follow me online at Twitter at Cloud Foundry Art. This is Sam Beaver from MongoDB. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey, yeah, thank you. I'm a product manager at MongoDB. I know some of you in the audience. And today we're going to be talking about how MongoDB and Pivotal are working together. Mallika, do you want to just do the agenda? I'm going to briefly cover 5 minutes on just what is MongoDB and the kind of the need for it. And then really the bulk of this presentation is going to be Mallika talking about the work that we've been doing specifically together. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about what Pivotal Cloud Foundry is, just to give you a very brief introduction of what Cloud Foundry is, and then we'll go deeper into how do you actually run MongoDB on Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and then we'll go into a demo, and then we can have time for Q&A after that.
All right, perfect. So I said I've been given 5 minutes, and Mallika's going to take a finger off each hand for every minute I go over. So real quick, what is MongoDB? Okay, fundamentally, the whole database kind of industry was founded on relational principles, and so those principles are things like having an expressive query language, in particular being able to write sophisticated queries against your data out of the box, arguably strongly consistent. You want your application to have the most recent or most up-to-date copy of the data as you're querying it. And then the database is just one component. It's all of the management pieces around that as well. You know, does it fit into your IT stack? Can you manage it okay? Can you monitor it? Can you back it up? And so on. So those are great principles. Relational's been around a long time, 30, 40 years. The world's changed a lot, right? The amount of data has grown dramatically in the last few years. And just as a stat, right, 90% of the world's data was generated in the last 2 years. All right, think about that for a second. And actually, that stat's probably even outdated today because this slide's like a couple months old. And so 80% of that data is actually unstructured. So it doesn't map nicely to tables anymore. It doesn't sit in rows and columns. And unstructured data is growing twice as fast as structured data is growing these days. So the need for having a kind of more flexible schema database is greater than ever. The amount of risk you're dealing with is going up on a daily basis. You're being asked to deliver applications not just to thousands of users, but to millions of users. And for that application to always be available, right? 100% uptime. Time and cost demands are going down. So effectively, people are asking you to ship weekly or monthly as opposed to yearly. And in terms of cost, you want to make use of either a cloud infrastructure or of your commodity hardware that you have sat around. And so really that's where a bunch of databases around 10 years ago were created, and they were called NoSQL databases. And so they were effectively designed to address today's modern application requirements. It's things like having flexible schemas, being able to scale and remain performant across many nodes, and always be available to the end customer. Unfortunately for NoSQL there's a lot of trade-off there, and actually they lose a lot of the left-hand side of this image, which is the principles that relational was built on. And so really that's where MongoDB comes in, is the way we're architected. It's called a nexus architecture. We actually combine the best of both worlds. So we keep everything that relational has developed over the last 40 years, and we add in the pioneering kind of viewpoints of like Google and Amazon, who are building these new principles for addressing how customers are using modern applications and what that demand is. Just some fun stats real quick. We just surpassed Postgres as the 4th most popular database now. Fastest growing, roughly 200% month over month. The top 3, Oracle, MySQL, and Microsoft, they've got a 30-year head start on us. So we're pretty happy with 4th for now. But they're also losing mind share as people seeing more demand for doing non-relational things. We have a pretty large ecosystem, 15 million downloads to date, 35,000 user group members. So you can pretty much find a mug anywhere in any city you're at. And over 2,000 customers, big customers, big names, some in this room, some in this conference, eBay and Viacom and Google, MetLife, and so on. So we're definitely, becoming pervasive technology. As I mentioned real quick, it's not just about the database. We bundle a lot of tools around MongoDB to make managing it and running it a whole lot easier. And so one of the key things on this slide is MongoDB Ops Manager over on the left here. And effectively, Ops Manager will let you automate, backup, and monitor your MongoDB deployment, thousands of nodes, right, seamlessly. And it's great for doing MongoDB deployments. The second component of that is provisioning those MongoDB instances in the first place and being able to seamlessly push that out into your private or public infrastructure. So really that's where Cloud Foundry comes in, and this is leading into what Mallika's going to be speaking about. So that's my 5 minutes. I think I keep my fingers, and I'm going to pass it to you.
Thanks, Sam. So for those who are new to Pivotal Cloud Foundry or Cloud Foundry itself, this is a very brief overview of Cloud Foundry. The Cloud Foundry haiku basically reads like this. Here's my source code, run it on the cloud for me, I don't care how. So this actually was put forward by Ansi, who is our VP of engineering for Pivotal Cloud Foundry. And this actually describes Cloud Foundry in a nutshell, because Pivotal Cloud Foundry is basically the enterprise version of Cloud Foundry, the open source platform as a service. So it's fully enterprise ready. It's a cloud native platform. It's language, framework, and infrastructure as a service agnostic, which is where the piece about here is my code, run it, I don't care how, piece really comes in. It can manage VMs, it can manage containers, it can orchestrate data services as well as applications. It can scale horizontally, it can scale vertically, and there's also a component of auto-scaling that's part of Pivotal Cloud Foundry. So you can think about the Cloud Foundry services or any services that run on top of Cloud Foundry like MongoDB, as here is my legacy or non-cloud native or NoSQL data service. Run it on the cloud for me. I don't care how. So that's what we're going to focus on for the rest of the session. So before I go deeper into how do you actually run MongoDB as a service on Pivotal Cloud Foundry, let's very quickly go through some definitions, because you're going to hear these terms a couple of times, and if you're new to them, it's going to be a little confusing. So the first thing you're going to hear over and over again is the concept of a service broker. So the service broker is basically the component of your service, the data service in question, in this case MongoDB, that implements the Service Broker API. So that brings me to the next point. What is a Service Broker API? So your Service Broker API is simply the API that has to be implemented whenever you want to integrate any data service with Cloud Foundry. The third term you're going to see as part of the architecture is the cloud controller. So this is, again, you don't need to care about all this. This is just for information. So I'm going to kind of go through this very quickly. So cloud controller is a component of Cloud Foundry. It provides the REST API endpoints for all the clients to access the system itself, and it internally maintains a database predictably called as the Cloud Controller Database. So it maintains your orgs, your spaces, user roles, all the details of the data services running on Cloud Foundry, and so on. And lastly, the router. It routes any incoming traffic coming to Cloud Foundry to the right components. Now we are getting into the really, really cool part about the service, which is Bosh 2.0. So anybody who is new to Cloud Foundry, something you need to know about Bosh is that Bosh is the Cloud Foundry orchestration layer, and the 2.0 piece comes into play because Bosh 2.0 can now do advanced real-time provisioning, dynamic provisioning of VMs and install software across hundreds of VMs. It does everything from release engineering to deployment to lifecycle management to performance monitoring of all the components that it's orchestrating, applications, data services, VMs, containers. It does failure recovery, and it will do software updates with literally minimal to zero downtime. So basically, what that means for me or for anybody who is writing a service on Cloud Foundry is that a legacy or a NoSQL or a non-cloud native database can now run on Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and you can have, with minimal operator sort of interference, have the ability to give your developers, hey, here is a MongoDB service, for example, spin up at your discretion as you want, and the operator has complete control and complete view of how many clusters have been spun up at any given point in time. So I mentioned dynamic on-demand provisioning. So why on-demand provisioning, and why is that important, or why is that even significant? So the world before on-demand dynamic provision, the world before Bosch looked something like this. You could not have dedicated service instances. You could not have, if you wanted to create a service, data service to run on Cloud Foundry, you could not have very clean availability zones and job properties defined, and that would make it harder for the service broker to create a deployment manifest. You could not have larger VM sizes. You could not have smaller VM sizes. You could not have an upgrade of your existing cluster. You could not have the ability to increase, scale up, or scale down a data service. So let's say you want to specifically change the replication factor in your data service, or any of the service-specific properties. None of that was possible before Bosch 2.0. So this particular service is one of the first to leverage Bosch 2.0 to dynamically provision your MongoDB service. So what would happen earlier was you would have to spin up VMs, and they would be basically waiting for your services. Here what's going to happen is when you decide, okay, I want to spin up a sharded cluster, or I want to spin up a single replica set, you're spinning up the VMs on demand irrespective of which infrastructure as a service it's running on. You don't need to change any of the configuration. The tile will handle all of that. And you're going to see a demo of all this, so don't worry too much about it. So the next really powerful thing in Bosch 2.0 is Bosch links, the concept of Bosch links. So what used to happen before Bosch links was, if you wanted to, if you had multiple jobs, as is the case, you would have to define the static IP addresses and the DNS properties, all of that within the job, so that it knows to accept another job. So when you think about the scalability factor of it, you would have to have operators actually writing the network address properties, and it can get complex and it can get very error prone very quickly. So when you factor in having multiple environments, when you factor in having to automate that, it's not really possible. It's not an easy problem to solve. So Bosch links, what it does is it makes the Bosch director. The Bosch director is basically the core component, the core orchestrating component of Bosch. So it makes the Bosch director completely responsible for all of this, for the IP management, which makes life really simple, and it also adds on to the infrastructure as a service agnostic piece of Cloud Foundry. So now, very quickly, what exactly goes into your on-demand service broker workflow? So you're seeing some of the components that I talked about earlier: the service broker, the services API, the cloud controller database, and the router. So now you're actually going to see what exactly is the flow of information when I want to provision a service, in which, in this case, it would be MongoDB. So the first thing that you would do from either the CF-CLI, that is the Cloud Foundry command line interface, or from the Cloud Foundry Apps Manager UI, both of which I will show you a little later, is you issue the CF Marketplace command. So what it does is it goes and talks to the Cloud Controller database and says, hey, I need to know what services are available, so can you please go and fetch all the appropriate services, fetch me the catalog of services that I can use. So it does that, and now I know what I want to create. So now I do a CF create service, which will, in this case, it's going to be MongoDB. So I end up creating a service of MongoDB with the appropriate plan that I want to select. So if you see on the extreme right-hand side under service plans, you see a couple of plans, single node, standalone, single replica set, sharded cluster. So this will vary depending on what service that is actually running on Cloud Foundry. But for the purposes of MongoDB, we have 3 plans at the moment. So once the CF create service is initiated, what's going to happen is it will go talk to the infrastructure as a service and say, please go create these VMs for me. The infrastructure as a service, so once the Bosh orchestrates the VM creation or completes the installation of the appropriate agents on them, and then completes the installation of the appropriate software, in this case it would be MongoDB or it could be any other database, it will say, okay, service created, you can go use it. Then we come to the binding and the unbinding of the service. So what this simply allows you to do is now you have a service that is ready for your application to talk to. And if you don't want the application to talk to that service anymore, you can very cleanly cut that connection using the CF unbind. And the same thing for CF delete service. So the CF here, if you haven't guessed already, it stands for Cloud Foundry. So the CF delete service does the same thing in reverse. It talks to the IaaS, deprovisions everything, and then it reclaims all of your resources. So before I go into a demo, one thing I wanted to highlight, the difference between a traditional Bosh managed service and the MongoDB service that's going to runs on Cloud Foundry is this, that what we have done here is we have leveraged Bosh 2.0 and Pivotal Cloud Foundry and Bosh links, as well as MongoDB's Enterprise Ops Manager. So we kind of get the best of both worlds. So we are using all of the on-demand dynamic service provisioning capabilities of Bosh, and we're using the Mongo Enterprise Ops Manager to actually install the appropriate cluster configurations. So what happens is after Bosh spins up the VMs, installs the appropriate agents, the control is handed off to the Mongo Ops Manager. So what happens is the Mongo Ops Manager is aware of the cluster, and if you're using Mongo Ops Manager, an enterprise user of MongoDB, you are able to do monitoring and all of the other good stuff that comes with that product. So just to sum it up, we can provision your infrastructure as a service resources during service creation. Everything is very nicely, very cleanly packed into a tile, and it's going to run on any IaaS without any modification. So that was a lot of slides. Let's go into a very nice and powerful demo. Okay, so what you're seeing there is the Pivotal Cloud Foundry Ops Manager UI. So very quickly, it is, if you see on the extreme left-hand side, it says Amazon Web Services. So that's just to say that this particular Ops Manager is actually installed on AWS. And the next one, the next tile over there, that's the Pivotal Elastic Runtime. I'll give you a demo of that as well, but that is the Apps Manager piece of it. And you can also, you can create a service through the command line, or you can create a service through the UI. So we can go deeper into the MongoDB tile that has been installed here. And it's the same process to install as you would install any other tile. You have to configure the availability zones. You have to configure a separate network for all the services. You would have to configure and point to your MongoDB Ops Manager URL, the appropriate username, API key, specify which VM. So that drop-down will automatically change based on which IaaS you're running on. So if it's running on vSphere, it's going to show something completely different. Then you have a whole bunch of errand settings that it has to run when you initially install the tile. You get a lot of other information about resource configurations, stem cells that you're going to have to select the appropriate one only once. This is all stuff that your operator will have to do. The developers never have to do this. Once the tile has been installed, it will be available for use to the developers. So this has been installed, and what I'm going to do now is target my Cloud Foundry installation. So you can see there, I targeted mine, otherwise you would have to log in. Now, specifically within that installation, I am targeting an org that I have created, which is the MongoDB org. So org is basically, you could think about it as a line of business, kind of a separation. So all the apps that belong to a particular line of business or a particular application. And within the orgs, you have spaces. So you have development, you have testing, you have staging, and so on. So I selected the MongoDB org and the development space. And now I'm going to create a service as an end user, as a developer, within that space. So what I did now was I was I did the CF services command. So what it shows me is the list of all the services that have already been created, that are available. So you can see there is a single replica set that was already created. There is a sharded cluster set that was already created. And I'm going to create another one, which, so first of all, we'd have to see what plans are available to us. So I did the CF marketplace, and I can see that there is a standalone plan also available to me. So I'm going to select that, and creating a service is really easy. You would have to issue the CF create service command with the service name in question and the appropriate plan in question, and then you have to give a unique name for the service itself. So I'm just kickstarting the creation of a standalone MongoDB service. So it's actually going to create a single node. So you can see at any point in time what the service creation is exactly doing. So when I try to check the status of this service creation, it'll tell me that the service instance provisioning is in process. Now, if I'm an operator, what I can also do is, and just so that you guys know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, I can log in to the Bosh director and go look at the tasks. So I can see that there is a task here where it's saying create deployment. So let's see what it is exactly doing. So you can see that it started preparing the deployment, it's figuring out what it needs to compile, and then finally it's creating one node. So this plan is supposed to contain one node, so it's creating one missing VM. So where is it doing this? In this situation, it's doing all of this on Amazon. So when I pull up the MongoDB node, it will give me one node that is still, getting initialized. So once that completes, and it's going to take the amount of time that it takes to complete depending on your network latency or where your IaaS is. So obviously, if it's vSphere or in-house, it's going to be way faster than anywhere else. Again, it all depends on the network speed. So while that's going on, this is the apps manager interface that I talked about earlier. So you can do everything that we just did from the command line from here as well. So you can create a service with the appropriate plan through this user interface, and you can see all the services that are present here. And you can do app bindings and unbindings and so on through this interface as well. So let's see where it's at. So it's still creating the missing VM. Okay, great. So it finally it finished creating the VM, and what it's doing now is it's updating the Mongo node. So essentially what it is exactly doing is it's installing the MongoDB agent on that node. And you can see this little canary word over here. So in this case, it really doesn't matter because it's a single node, so it's a standalone. But imagine if you are deploying a sharded cluster, let's say it's a 36 node cluster or a 100+ node cluster. What Bosh is going to do is it will not actually start updating all the nodes at the same time. It will do one node to begin with. Once it completes, basically once the sacrificial canary is completed properly, then it will go and initiate the updating of all the other nodes where it's supposed to install the agents or the appropriate software. So everything has been completed, or it will be here shortly. So everything's been completed here, but if I go back there, it's going to show me that the instance provisioning is still in progress. The reason for that is at this point, the agent has handed it off to the MongoOps manager, where it's telling the MongoOps manager, hey, I'm ready. Please come here and install the standalone configuration that I passed to you. So once that is actually completed, it will be ready for use. So once the instance service is completed, it'll tell me create succeeded. You're seeing the one that we just created, and then you can now bind applications to it. You can use the cluster as you would any other MongoDB cluster. And the beauty of it is that your developers don't have to reach out and say, hey, can you please give me access to a Mongo cluster for XYZ reason? And at the same time, your operators don't have to worry how they're using it and that they don't have control over what exactly the developers are doing. Okay, so that was basically the demo of the MongoDB service and the MongoDB service running on top of Pivotal Cloud Foundry. It will be released fairly quickly. This will run on Pivotal Cloud Foundry 1.8. Going forward. That's the reason for that is because earlier versions of Cloud Foundry are not based on Bosch 2.0. Questions?
Can you deploy this on multi-data center in Mongo?
Yes. Yes. Other questions? I think we're almost at the top of the hour or half an hour.
If we spin up another server, what about the existing data?
Okay, so the question is, if you spin up another server, what about the existing data? So the another server of what exactly? Are you talking about another cluster? Okay, so are you planning to spin down your existing cluster?
I want to increase another cluster.
Okay, so you're planning to actually scale up your existing cluster. Yeah, so that is a feature that is not part of the beta release, but it will be out with GA. So when you spin up or when you add another node to your cluster, it's going to redistribute the data. So your data is not going to get lost because you're just adding an additional node to your existing cluster. Other questions? And, okay. We don't have a firm GA date yet because it is dependent on the GA of Pivotal Cloud Foundry 1.8, which is also not GA at the moment. But if you're interested in the MongoDB tile as a beta, the best way to get it would be either to reach out to me or to Sam here, or if you have a Pivotal contact, to reach out to your field engineer in question, and they will definitely route you to the right person. Other questions?
So this kind of showed the VM provisioning, like what if we already have a Mongo cluster and we just need a database to be built in, just another database to share a Mongo cluster. Is that feature available, or this is purely for reducing the effort of building going to IaaS and doing the work?
Okay, so the question was, what if I already have an existing Mongo cluster and I just want to add a database to my existing Mongo cluster? So this product is to spin up clusters, not add databases to an existing cluster that is running somewhere else.
You could do that at the app tier or in the admin side of MongoDB. Yeah, not through Cloud Foundry.
Yeah, you can use the Mongo Ops Manager to do that if you already have a Mongo cluster running through Cloud Foundry.
I'm just trying to find the feature list of this solution.
Right, and I know you asked for the docs, and they will also be out soon.
And sorry, I just wanted to add, if I'm in the exhibition hall, we have a MongoDB booth there. If anyone's particularly interested, you want to come have a chat, be more than happy to. And if any of you have MongoDB, contacts, feel free to get in touch. And I would more than love to have a 20-minute discussion on what you're doing with Cloud Foundry and MongoDB. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.